The views and opinions expressed on the following program are not necessarily those of the staff and management of KLAY or those who advertise their products or services on this station.
Welcome once again to Ask an Atheist, where we may not celebrate Easter, but we won't say no to a barbecue. My name is Sam Mulvey, and with me today is Mike Gillis.
How's it going?
And Rebecca Friedman. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Sam.
Okay.
A little hungry now after mentioning that barbecue.
I have to admit, I'm a little bit low on Z's today. Last night, I finally discovered Minecraft.
What is Minecraft?
It's a game where it's basically Legos for your computer, and never before have so many MIPS died for the cause of so many blocks. I'll just put it that way. Did you guys know? I don't exactly remember the date, but the countdown to backpedaling is coming up. I think it's 27 days. Is it?
Yeah, there's 27 days before what happens? Before the not rapture?
Before the not rapture.
I like to think of it as the unrapture.
The unrapture.
You have 365 unraptures.
Well, now it's also 27 days until our countdown to backpedaling. The end is live music event.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be at Dorky's Barcade. We have some great bands planned.
Yeah, it's at 11th and Pacific in Tacoma, and we will have Three Ninjas, Bone Poets Orchestra, and Lena Lou. And we'll be counting down the final moments to when we're expecting the backpedaling to begin in our time zone. So it's $10 at the door, and it is, I believe, in the 8 to 1:30?
8 to 1:30.
Okay.
And for those who aren't sure what we're expecting people to backpedal on, this is about family radio led by Harold Camping, who believes that the rapture will happen on May 21st. We believe that the rapture will not happen on May 21st, and we believe that, well, they will have to figure out how to explain that.
Yeah, this actually isn't even the first time for Harold Camping either. He also made a prediction like this back in 1994. So.
Oh, I didn't know this wasn't his first one.
No, it's not his first, and I doubt it'll be his last.
Oh, boy. Okay. Well, I'm going to put this topic on hold because we actually have a call. We've got Winston in Singapore who'd like to talk to us about pro-life hypocrisy. How you doing today?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello. On the air.
How you doing?
Hello, I'm doing very well, thanks. I'm 27 years old, and like most teenagers, or at least many teenagers from what I know, I was suicidal for quite some time when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a pro-life, quote-unquote, friend, and instead of helping me feel better, even though I was literally on the cusp of suicide, he actually made me more suicidal.
How did he do that?
Well, he was naturally very confrontational, and instead of listening to me, he would just argue with me all the time. He would say things like, oh, you're not really that depressed, you're not really having a bad life, and so on.
Was this on religious grounds, Winston?
No. Basically, my father would pretend to give me a choice whenever he wanted me to do something. And so I ended up doing more exercise than education when I was in high school, and I just really hated it.
No, I've never been a big fan of exercise either. So this was a pro-life person, and this
yeah, he was about my age at the time.
Okay, and about your age, and so this is pro-life in the traditional anti-abortion stance, I'm assuming.
Yes, and he's also very strongly against assisted suicide, and they would have enough empathy to recognize when someone is close to suicide.
You know, I have seen this a lot, where somebody, where politically or ideologically, they're for the idea of they're against the idea of abortion, they're against the idea of assisted suicide. Life is a gift; you must make the most of it, even if your life stinks. And then when suicide enters into the equation for somebody who's not a baby or a terminally ill person, the answer usually ends up being suck it up.
Yeah, and so what I would like to see is a study done comparing pro-lifers to pro-choicers on an empathy scale or an EQ test, emotional intelligence.
I'm not familiar with the EQ test here. Could you fill me in?
It stands for emotional quotient as opposed to IQ.
Ah, okay.
I think I've seen a book written about that, but I'm really not familiar with it at all.
Okay.
Yeah, and if you're familiar with Wesley J. Smith, he will frequently say that compassion means to suffer with someone. And equivocation fallacy aside, I would be hard-pressed to think of a more defeatist attitude.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, if that was all we needed, we wouldn't even have aspirin today.
And I know this is one of the criticisms I've seen of Mother Teresa, too, where her facilities are woefully understaffed, I mean, they don't, the sort of services they provide are woefully inadequate. And there's this general mentality that pain is something beautiful and that you should sort of embrace this pain rather than have it be this problem you need to be pulled out of.
Their own pain. And under that definition, which is actually the etymology of the word compassion, if I stab someone and then stab myself, hey, that's an act of compassion, isn't it? Because I'm creating an opportunity for two people to suffer together.
Well, Winston, you said you started off your call saying that you were 27 years old, and obviously you're no longer an adolescent, and obviously you're still around with us right now.
I'm no longer suicidal, fortunately.
Did you come out of that through religious means, or through in spite of sort of the religious background that the religious milieu that maybe your pro-life friend was in?
It was definitely in spite of religion, and I posted my story on Wesley J. Smith's blog, and he asked me if a suicide pill would have helped, and I said, well, that person would have actually had to listen to me, so my answer would have to be unequivocally yes. A suicide pill would have made me less suicidal, actually.
Well, congratulations. I guess that congratulations is a weird thing to say, but I don't know.
Yeah.
When somebody defeats that in their mind, you need to say something. Welcome, congratulations. Yeah. There just really isn't a word that I feel really covers it. So, Winston, you're in Singapore. I assume you're not listening to us live on the radio.
I actually, I just called you up. I listened to a bit of it while I was on hold. But
okay, if you'd like to share your story on that blog, if you could go to askanatheist.tv and let us know where that is, we'd be happy to link to it on the post for this episode.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you. I'd also like to finish off with a compassion-related story on William Lane Craig, and I hope you're sitting down because this will knock your jaw off, I think. Basically, someone asked Lane Craig about his stance on the Canaanite genocide in the Bible, and can you guess which group of people Craig had the most quote-unquote sympathy for?
I'm going to guess not the Canaanites?
Yes. Can you guess a bit more specifically?
I'm going to guess the people who are not on the business end of the sword.
He was likely in favor of the Hebrews?
Yes, exactly. I'm quoting from memory here. He says on his Reasonable Faith blog, so who does God wrong in the slaughter of the Canaanites? Not the Canaanite adults, they were corrupt and worthy of judgment. Not the children, for they inherit the kingdom of heaven. Ironically, I think the most difficult part of this debate is the apparent wrongdoing done to the Israeli soldiers themselves.
Wow.
Oh my.
That's amazing. All right, we're gonna have to move on, okay. Winston. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks for taking my call.
Thank you. Bye-bye. That's, I guess, one more country on the list.
We do love to get calls, and if you would like to call in, our phone number is 253-584-1480.
And we also get voicemails. And let us dive into voicemail, which goes back to our countdown to backpedaling event.
Or upcoming non-event.
If you guys happen to think that the Harold Camping Family Radio organization could potentially be held accountable for any financial burden that people experience due to their faith in the Family Radio End of the World campaign. Thanks a lot. Hi, this is Duncan from Virginia.
Okay, I kind of played that in a Mobius strip because I got to it a bit late. But that was Duncan from Virginia, and he's asking about financial liability for Harold Camping.
That's a tough issue.
That is a very tough issue.
I don't know. I mean, for one, I don't imagine that anyone would sue him. I mean, again, Harold Camping has done this before in the past, and nobody has sued him before, I imagine you'd have to have one of his followers or a family member of one of these followers of somebody perhaps who isn't, I guess you could say, competent to sort of stand for themselves legally,
right,
to do this on their behalf. I don't really see it happening. I really don't.
There also needs to be some proof that he, in some way, benefited from people selling their stuff off. If people sell their stuff off and then give it to some other charity, then, you know, he didn't benefit from it, so fraud is kind of hard to say.
And I don't think he's actually asking people to give all of their property away and start traveling around the country screaming about the end. He's creating a backdrop against which I think somebody doing that is much more likely, but he's not asking them to do it either.
I think one important thing or interesting thing to look at is there's the issue of whether he would be criminally liable or civilly liable, and anyone could bring a civil suit. One thing that interests me is that whether the followers of Harold Camping themselves would be likely to do so or not. And actually, there is a recent article in Mother Jones magazine, and I accessed it through motherjones.com, and it's called "The Science of Why We Don't Believe Science," and it actually starts out by explaining a case study from actually nearly 50 or just over 50 years ago, where there was a similar kind of group that believed that the rapture was going to happen. This was actually a cult leader that believed that aliens had given the precise date of an earth-rending cataclysm, and it was going to be December 21st, 1954.
Wow.
And there were some anthropologists and psychologists that were following them along, and we found out what was going to happen with them. Did they start backpedaling? Did they get mad at their cult leader? Did they say, hey, you know, you said that this was going to happen? And what was really surprising is that the moment, you know, that December 21st arrived without incident, they didn't start backpedaling. They didn't try or they didn't get mad. What they did was their backpedaling was actually a form of rationalization. And they believed that they had been spared at the last minute by their prayers.
That's the thing is I've noticed that a lot of people will just, you know, we're expecting the backpedaling and we're calling it backpedaling, but rationalization in many ways may be more likely. And I do kind of wonder, what is the numerological significance of the 21st of the month?
Well, I believe it's really just, isn't it just the winter solstice? I mean, those usually happen on the 21st. I mean, it's like March 21st.
December 21st, yeah, that makes sense. But yeah. May 21st is that the summer solstice? Or?
No, it is neither the summer solstice nor the spring equinox. It's about dead center between those two. So maybe that's where it may lie. But
I don't know. These people use the same kind of Da Vinci Code rationalizations. This number sounds like that number, and it matches this times 5 squared. They do this all the time, and there really doesn't come anything out of it.
I'm imagining it's probably a quote from a Bible or some back-done denotation on the Mayan calendar or something like that. So if you guys know, and you'd like to let us know, you can give us a call at 253-584-1480. This is Ask an Atheist. And our next email comes to us from Phil from New Zealand in order to continue the international theme of this episode. And he writes, "My uncle said something like this: last time you were on a plane trip, you did not see the pilot, therefore you have faith that the pilot is flying the plane." I was trying to say that faith is not a good thing. What would your response be to this? Any help would be great. I know his logic is wrong, just wanting your help with it. I think he is getting faith and trust mixed up.
Oh, I would simply say that if you're a theist and you're somebody who uses arguments like this, try him out on an atheist to find out if it's a good idea first.
Well, apparently his uncle is because.
Oh yeah, but I mean, it's a lot of times these people, you come up with these great arguments, these apologetic proofs, and all they do is bounce it off other Christians.
Right.
And I think this is the sort of answer that. It's existed in a little bubble. It's kind of like a racehorse. It has to be fed just the right amount of food and has to get the right kind of exercise, because if you let it loose, it would die. And I think that's this kind of argument. Why is it a bad argument? Because you can go and see the pilot come off the plane at the end, that you hear the pilot talk to you, and you realize it's not just in your heart, but it's over a loudspeaker.
That's exactly it. The pilot talks to you. You can actually go see the pilot. There is a place where you can go where you can see the guy driving a plane. When you get onto the plane, you look out the window, you see the flight deck, which is where the flying happens. Is that there is physical proof that you can go out and see, taste if you want, I suppose, touch and test.
Probably some FAA regulations against licking the pilot.
Yeah, licking the pilot while operating your Nintendo DS. There is proof out there. There's physical proof.
And if you're a child, you can actually go up and talk to the pilot, and he'll give you that little wing pin, too.
Mike, I'm sorry to say that since 9/11, when we were all children, that was possible to get wings and visit them in the cockpit. Unfortunately, that is no longer. For the last 10 years, we haven't been able to do that.
Are you saying that's how 9/11 happened, that the guy with the box knife said, hey, I want to get one of those little pins?
That's... Oh, ow.
No, but unfortunately, FAA regulations are such that we can't actually go into the cockpit and visit the pilots during,
I was going to ask if we could get, like, Tim Eyman in here to get some initiative passed so that I could do that, because I've always wanted those flight wings. But now that you're putting ideas into the heads of people, I think I'm going to have to take a pass on that.
I wanted to say one thing. Sam, you've kind of taken a hobby of collecting little tracts that are left in cafes and libraries, and I saw one actually that said that defined faith in much the same way that Phil's uncle is. And it was saying that faith is believing in something even though you can't see it.
Right.
And what atheists say is no, faith is believing in something in spite of evidence. You don't have to see something for there to be evidence of something.
And that's what this comes down to, is that there is evidence, that it's testable, and that's why it's not really faith. Trust? Yeah, you trust the pilot to be able to fly the plane. You trust that he's sitting in his chair. But you can actually test for the existence of the pilot. You can test for the existence of the flight deck. We cannot test for the existence of God, and this goes back to the long conversations we've had about atheism in action, agnosticism in evidence. And this is the same thing.
And it's, there's two things. One, you can perform a test and see something happen, or one, you can observe a long record of things happening over and over and over. Over and over again, planes take off because, you know what? There's a pilot in the cockpit.
Absolutely. And this is Ask an Atheist. And we're going to be getting into our topic in a moment, but you can give us a call at 253-584-1480.
You can advertise on Ask an Atheist on the radio, on our website, and in our podcast. People just like you who have the same interests are listening right now, just like you are, and thousands will download this podcast and listen to it later. If you have a product, service, or idea to sell, people here in the Pacific Northwest and people around the world, thousands will hear your message. Let us help you sell your product, service, or idea. Contact us at advertising@askanatheist.tv. That's advertising@askanatheist.tv.
Tacoma Telematics wants to help you connect with your clients. We can give you a top-notch web presence. Tacoma Telematics can take your website to the next level and make it an integral part of your business. But that's not all. We can set you up with VoIP, bringing large corporation phone systems capability at mom-and-pop prices. We build intuitive interfaces to help you manage your resources quickly and efficiently. Take advantage of our holistic approach to helping your business succeed through and with technology. At Tacoma Telematics, we are committed to personal and professional integrity, open communication, and long-term relationships. See us at TacomaTelematics.com.
Secular humanism is a non-theistic view of the universe built on a foundation of reason, science, and democracy. Humanists support intellectual freedom and critical thinking, and we hold that human beings are autonomous centers of moral development. The Humanists of Washington is the oldest humanist organization in the state and offers a community of free thinkers who educate the public and celebrate life. For information on how you can be a part of the humanist activities in the Puget Sound area, become a member of the Humanists of Washington today. Visit humanistofwashington.org.
This is Ask an Atheist, 253-584-1480.
Yeah, so we're getting into our topic, and today's topic is politics.
Dun, dun, dun.
Politics? But I thought Ask an Atheist doesn't get into politics.
Well, we really don't. We're not a political show. I mean, this is something that people wonder why we dance around this so much, and that really gets down to it, is we're not a political show. There are thousands of those. I mean, that's most of AM talk radio. That's most of FM talk radio. We're not aiming to be another one. We all have strongly held political convictions about a plethora of topics, but this show really isn't the platform for that. This is about our atheism. Our atheism is the one part of us that is just not well represented. You're not going to see a lot of us in the media. Maybe you see Richard Dawkins on CNN for 2 minutes, but you're not going to hear a long-form argument from our perspective, where if you're going to hear a political perspective, I can't imagine that there's anyone here sitting here in front of our microphones that doesn't have at least one major media figure that doesn't basically represent your political viewpoints outside of atheism.
There are people who get close, but for me it's more historical figures than figures in the present.
Well, we'll count dead people in that one.
Okay, then yeah, there's definitely somebody who represents me.
So it's not like there's any huge gap where we're not represented, even in a piecemeal fashion, among multiple people.
And I have never been this vague about my political beliefs in my life.
If you like vague, hold on. So we are, in a way, we're talking about atheism, we're talking about skeptical inquiry, we're talking about the separation of church and state. We usually don't get into politics unless politics gets into us.
Yeah.
Unless we have like a politician who's specifically pushing for something for religious reasons, or even marketing themselves as a Christian politician, we usually don't touch on it. We're not going to talk about transportation. We're not going to talk about health care. We're not going to talk about union rights or any of the other real hot topics that are going on there. So we are intentionally limiting the range of our discussions to just these topics. So anytime we talk about politics, it's because somebody's getting the Ten Commandments on public land or in front of a public school.
Well, the politics sort of injected in the last episode, because of the moral majority thing, is that we suddenly had religious people dictating terms to policemen, and that would change things.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons that it's important that we do sort of stay engaged, because, of course, if as I think Howard Zinn once said, you can't stay neutral on a moving train, that this stuff is moving whether you get involved in it or not. So the other thing, too, is that if we get into topics like healthcare, guns, that sort of stuff, it can derail the whole thing, and suddenly we're not even talking about atheism. We're not even an atheist show anymore. And here's the second thing. Atheists are politically diverse. We are an odd bunch of people, and for the most part, we're connected by our lack of something. We don't believe in an imaginary friend, a very popular imaginary friend. So what is, like we said, atheism isn't so much an ism as it is the lack of that ism.
Right.
And again, talking about that diversity, we're talking about a group of people that include Ayn Rand, who believes that selfishness is a virtue, and that everything should be deregulated and unregulated capitalism. And on the other hand, we have Karl Marx, also an atheist, somebody who believes that all property should be collectively owned by everyone, and he wrote the Communist Manifesto.
You can't get much more diverse than that.
Actually, I think you can, and you will find that in atheism, is that there are people who in some cases think Ayn Rand was a lightweight, and there are some people who think Karl Marx didn't communize enough. I mean, they're all over the place.
So talking, politically, we're talking a lot of people. We're talking about, Karl Rove, the guy who ran George W. Bush's campaign. We're talking Bill Maher, who's a liberal/libertarian, I guess you could say, television host, who is an atheist too. Also, we don't want to pigeonhole atheists. I mean, we don't want to get too specific, because we want to talk about a large, effectively large group of people. And when we get into stuff that's just topically irrelevant, we move away from our main points. And I think, let's look at some of that diversity again. The social issues, I think most atheists tend to be more socially progressive, socially tolerant, however you want to put it. Because when you get into that culture war stuff, you get into that stuff that's like, abortion, which doesn't have to be necessarily religiously based, but it almost universally seems to be. Things like getting prayer into schools, like our horrible decadent culture, and sex on TV and things like that.
Science and evolution in the classroom.
That sort of stuff. That stuff tends to be almost universally religiously based. So there aren't a lot of atheist social conservatives out there.
And on this show, we will talk about those issues.
Oh, absolutely. We'll bring them up when they come up. And so on social issues, yeah, we tend to agree on something, but it's not fair to pigeonhole us as all being so, oh, you guys are all just a bunch of communists. We're not at all. Then we get into economic issues. And this is where the unity just falls apart. We're all over the board. We're talking about atheists who think the government should provide everyone with health care, atheists who think the government should have no hand and the private sector should handle health care. We're talking about liberal atheists. We're talking about conservative atheists, libertarians, socialists, moderates, anarchists, progressives. everything in between and sideways and in front of and behind. We're talking about everything.
So, Becky, I know you and Mike were talking about a recent group about in the Atheist Political Party on Facebook or something, and it kind of melted down almost immediately.
Yeah, that Atheist Political Party on Facebook, somebody tried to start an affinity group. Also, in a sort of local meetup that I went to, someone equally tried to start an atheist political group that was, tried to write an atheist platform on all of these sorts of issues, on economics, on healthcare, and everything. And it melted down in real life the way that it melted down online on the Facebook group. Mike, you observed some of the really silly things that went on there.
Yeah, I'm somebody who's had some of a background in this. I've done third-party political organizing in the past, and I know how quickly these groups can break down into sort of infighting and bickering. And that was with a group that had some ideological cohesion. If you throw that out the window, it's just blood on the walls right off the bat. I mean, on the Facebook page, we had people saying, oh, they're taking their pet issues and saying that this is a necessity for atheism, that you can only, we have to run a vegan for president. You know, this is something that has, again, we've gone over this again. Nothing to do with atheism.
Right.
People taking, the thing is, a political party exists to take a stance on every issue. We don't have a parliamentary system where, if we get 3% of the vote, we get 3% of the seats. And we can't really run a party that only has one perspective, because 90% of the things that an elected representative is expected to vote on has nothing to do with atheism, nothing to do with belief or skepticism.
Yeah, I mean, atheism doesn't really have anything to say about healthcare. Atheism doesn't really have anything to say about controls on food production. These are things that most of us have very strong opinions on, but they're just not informed by what we believe.
Yeah, that you can have somebody who, I mean, we can all agree, it's like, okay, we're going to go by the facts. But once you have that common foundation of facts, you can go in totally different directions. And imagine what an atheist political primary would look like. Can you imagine that you could really have that Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged versus Communist Manifesto primary?
I think it would come down to a shouting match as to who's the stronger atheist. I'm the stronger atheist! No, I'm the stronger atheist!
It could be who's the nicer atheist.
That's true.
When has that ever happened in politics,
but really, politics likes to go for the hardcore in a lot of ways. So I think if there was an atheist election somewhere, that's how it would go.
And imagine if it had that sort of polar opposite position on practically every issue, except for we don't want the 10 Commandments on school property. If you went with that and you said, okay, one person has just won the primary, why would everyone on the other side of that divide who hasn't changed their minds go along with that? There's no way. It's not like everyone's going to go, oh, okay, so I lost the primary, and this guy who has the exact opposite opinion of me on pretty much every economic issue, from healthcare to transportation to your Social Security, oh yeah, I'm going to vote for him. It doesn't make sense that somebody that different, I mean, we're not talking about just degrees, we're talking about type, we're talking about somebody who's radically different from that. It just doesn't make any sense that these people would be even in the same political party.
And this really gets into what Sam often says, and has said on past days on Ask an Atheist, is that once you get beyond your lack of belief in God or gods, it's no longer atheism, but it's something else. For instance, Sam, you and I being humanists, we do have things that we believe in. We do have stances on some of these social issues, but that is in spite of our atheism. That's in addition to it.
I wouldn't say in spite of. I think sometimes my atheism does inform certain ideas, but it's not the main driver. When it comes to things like belief and what drives me politically, you're right. Secular humanism is that engine. Secular humanism does have specific things to say, and we will talk about secular humanism sometime. But while we're talking about atheism and what politics means to atheism, this is why I go with my two-word definition: no God. There's no frills, no additions, no fillers, no mixers, no sodium biglutamate or whatever.
Yeah, anything on top of that you're bringing to it, like that person wanting a vegan candidate. Your veganism is something you've piled on your atheism. It isn't a necessity.
Right.
So let's look a bit about what is the status quo for atheists in politics, because this is something where really we don't have power in politics at all. We have politicians in both parties have no real political consequences if they throw us under the bus. And we're talking about like the Kay Hagan situation. This is a U.S. Senate race in, I believe, 2008.
Yeah.
Where Kay Hagan, who was the Democratic challenger, I guess she had been at a fundraiser with somebody who was an atheist activist, and her opponent, who was the incumbent, called atheists vile and attacked us and said, how dare you, and even accused her challenger of being an atheist. And instead of saying, you know, what the answer we would sort of hope to hear from a politician, which is, you know what, I may not be an atheist, but there's nothing wrong with it, how dare you use that kind of divisive language? She didn't do that at all. She threw us under the bus and instead wrapped herself in religion as mostly as possible. So if you're an atheist voter, what are you supposed to say to that? It's like, wow, nobody wants to be seen with me. The same thing is when we had these largely innocuous billboards being put up saying, you don't have to believe in God to be good. And even politicians in both parties getting up and talking about how horrible and divisive we are. It just seems kind of like we still have these state constitutions that have language barring us from serving on juries or having elected office, even though since the 60s these have been completely unenforceable. The mentality that put that language there is still in force. I know in Arkansas in 2005, I believe.
Not just unenforceable, but I believe constitutionally invalidated.
Complete. I mean, even in the first part of the Constitution, it says no religious tests. So even though these things are completely unenforceable, just getting the unenforceable language out of these constitutions should be easy, right?
Gets no support, right?
No support. I mean, there was a legislator in Arkansas that couldn't even get this bill out of committee, even though everyone knew you couldn't enforce this language.
Well, here's a difference. Here's one of the things about atheism and how it doesn't drive politics is I know a lot of atheists who are not interested in seeing those things be removed from the Constitution because they seem to be a waste of time because they're unenforceable.
Well, I mean, they are unenforceable, and I certainly wouldn't put this on the same level as keeping creationism out of school, something that can have this kind of definite effect. But I wouldn't say they're unimportant, because I think this is still a milestone for the sort of progress we're making. In terms of milestones for progress, it's like, we're not a constituency with anybody. We're largely kind of like somebody's embarrassing brother, that everyone would be happy to take our votes and our money, but nobody wants to be photographed with us. And I think if we're going to use the same comparison to the gay rights movement, where they were building for 20 years before doing this, we're not seeing atheist for candidate buttons on anyone's website, not even third-party websites.
Right.
And I'd say if we're going to use a metric for success, it would be that we officially become a constituency that people want to use.
Yeah, and there are people out there who are trying to build that. And to that end, we actually had a chat with somebody today. It was going to be a live interview, but unfortunately he was on the air. Or he was not, well, he's going to be on the air shortly, but he was in the air. He's on the plane right now. I believe there was a convention this week in Des Moines about...
Des Moines, Iowa, yes, an atheist convention.
Yeah, so who do we have to interview?
Oh, Sean Faircloth, who is the executive director of Secular Coalition for America.
All right, so here's that interview. We're going to kind of have a extended second segment of the show, and here we go. Our special guest joining us by phone today is Sean Faircloth, an attorney, newspaper columnist, law professor, elected politician, and atheist advocate. He served a decade in the Maine state legislature and was elected by the majority whip by his colleagues in the last term. And his legislative career was marked by advocating for children's rights and justice system reform. Sean is now the executive director of the Secular Coalition of America, a lobbying group that advocates for atheists and other non-believers. Welcome, Sean.
Yeah, great to be talking to you.
Yeah, hello. All right, so tell us about the Secular Coalition.
Sure. The Secular Coalition for America's primary mission is the separation of church and state and the acceptance and inclusion of non-theistic Americans in our civic life in this country. It's a real important mission that we serve uniquely. Another key part of our mission that I'm working a lot on in addition to those is the coalition aspect of Secular Coalition for America. In the past, our movement has sometimes been referred to as a circular firing squad, and I think we need to and have been successful because of great leadership from people like Herb Silverman, our board president, Woody Kaplan, our advisory board chair, in forming an organization that really profoundly changes the game by having coalition building as essential to what we do. And I feel we need to continue to further that as part of our public policy strategy in Washington, D.C.
So, Sean, why do you feel it's important that atheists specifically organize and lobby as opposed to, say, just like Americans United for Separation of Church and State, which doesn't have a position on this? A lot of people might say that the SCA is redundant. What would you say to that?
Well, it's interesting. I think it was on Bill Maher, what I'll call the Adam Carolla problem. I don't mean to pick on him, but the comedian that
it's okay.
I'm familiar with. But I saw him, he's someone I admire, but he made a comment about, well, that's why I'm a non-believer. I don't need to bother with anything. And I'm paraphrasing, so I hope he won't get mad about me paraphrasing him, but something like that.
So,
and to me, yeah.
So the idea is that because you're a non-believer, people think they can check out from the political process
right.
Yeah.
And I think that doing that is a huge error, because I'll tell you what, the fundamentalist Christian right, and it's to a lesser extent in the United States, but to some degree, fundamentalist viewpoints within other religious sectors, they are not sitting back. They are working really hard in the political process, and they are succeeding and have succeeded, particularly over the last 30 years, in changing not only the political landscape, but in many ways the nature of our government. There's someone at the Center for Study of Separation of Church and State at Emory University, an expert, a law professor in the field, who says rather starkly that separation of church and state is no longer the law of the land. And of course we have it in concept in our Constitution, but that as a practical matter, because of chipping away by politicians succumbing to political pressure from religious groups, that we've sort of seen it glide away without many of us noticing. And I fear there's a lot of truth in that. And that's what Secular Coalition for America is about. And to address, you mentioned about Americans United, great group, really like them, work closely with them, but we are offering a distinct perspective. We are saying specifically that Warren Buffett is not a radical, that Bill Gates is not a radical. Bill Gates is a mainstream business leader and has mainstream moderate ideas. But if Bill Gates were to consider running, as I hope that with his level of fame it would be a different ballgame, but with someone with his philosophy, including his non-theistic philosophy, if he were to run for Congress or even in many states the legislature, I think he'd have trouble getting elected with that philosophy, and that is crazy stuff.
Yeah, we were talking.
We want to change that.
We were talking about that. For one thing, they've been saying that separation of church and state is only a de facto right since roughly 1801. And the other thing is not just political life, but political life does affect real life. Just last week, our last episode, as we were talking about the 1980s Satanic Panic, where one of the effects that made it so bad was the rise of the moral majority and the idea of Satanists everywhere.
Right. Well, actually, you might need to educate me more about the Satanism, but one thing I'll say is if you ever want to find a group that lives out the creed of Margaret Mead, you've heard this quote before, a small group of committed people. Don't doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. In fact, they're the only people that have. Well, I'll tell you, liberal types a lot of times have that on posters on the walls of their nonprofits or, when they're organizing for something. But I'll tell you a group that's really lived it, and that's the religious right and fundamentalist right. They have gotten out there and not just talk the talk, they have acted the act. They have organized, ran people for city council, for school board, and they have changed America. And you got to take your hat off to them to some degree. And meanwhile, we've been sitting back saying, well, we'll just hope things turn out right. Well, it's not going to turn out right without our social action. And law after law after law. If you go to our website at secular.org, they've been successful in changing laws that really crumble the wall, separating church and state. And I'd say not just generally in America, but a lot of people who are already secular, already committed secularists, aren't aware of these laws, and they're listed on our website, just a few samplings that you can see. And there's many more after that.
So, Sean, I mean, we're going up against a group, like you said, the religious right, which is incredibly powerful. They not only have their own radio networks, TV networks, they're basically lobbying 24/7. These are people that can even meet with presidents that they badmouth publicly. How can we, given that we don't have the same amount of money and organizing and lobbying muscle yet, how do we compete with somebody like that?
Well, I want to sound like a horror film and then a Frank Capra film. First, as far as the horror film, be afraid, and be very afraid, because there's things to be fearful about, and you are dead on. I mean, just to take the Vatican of extreme fundamentalism there in Colorado Springs, the economic and political power concentrated just there is huge. I mean, it's really dramatic. For my board, I put together a bar chart where, you showed our budget versus the budget of some of the several, and I'm talking like over 10 fundamentalist political action organizations. I'm talking about churches. I'm talking about political action organizations that are connected with churches and perfectly legal. And
things like the Family Research Council and those
right.
kind of focus on the family.
Exactly. And basically, you couldn't see our budget. I mean, because their bar chart went so high, I'd have to like go through the roof of the building where I was doing the presentation. So in that sense, be afraid and be very afraid, because it is a big deal.
That's something.
However,
that was something we were talking about, in that, you know, there's a huge amount of Christian media out there, and like almost every other show on the station during the day is religious and are supported by a church. We're just kind of people doing this, going by on a shoestring budget.
And well, there's a lot of truth in that, but let me just get back to the Frank Capra movie. Is I believe that we are the Jimmy Stewarts in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. We are moderate. We are reasonable. Our whole worldview is based on reason and evidence. And what we haven't been based on, and that I think can be a game changer, we haven't been focused on coalition building in a dramatic sense. To put it this way, a few steps from my office in Washington, D.C., is the White House. And I remember, within recent memory, not a long time ago, in recent memory, people saying to me, "Oh, Sean, there will not be, in our lifetimes, a black person elected president. It will not happen. Not realistic." And I said, actually, I think if you find a quality candidate, it can happen. And last I checked, there's a guy, a few blocks from my office who has a pretty darn good office at that White House, and it can happen. And my point being is that people who are secular Americans represent, and you can debate the exact percentages, but approximately a similar percentage as our African Americans in this country. But to their credit, African American people for a long time have organized, spoken out, run people for office, and had a voice. We have not. You got to organize, and that's what Secular Coalition for America, to me, is so important for, is that we got to lobby, and we are lobbying on your behalf. We had the first ever meeting with White House staff last year. We had a follow-up meeting last month, so we're having a significant impact. But I can tell you what, I won't sugarcoat it. To have a really more significant impact, coalition is the key, and that's why we're working on our 50-state secular coalition plan, because we've got to put the feet on the ground, and from Washington State to Florida.
Well, Sean, the coalition building that it sounds like you're oriented towards seems really quite proactive. I'm wondering, from your website, secular.org, some of the issues that your organization is tackling are twofold that interest me. One is politicking from the pulpit, i.e., stopping clergy from endorsing specific candidates, and then the IRS privileging of religious organizations, speaking towards the religious tax exemption. If I was wondering if at the state level or at the federal level, if the taxation issue is resolved, then would it really matter if clergy continue politicking from the pulpit? Wouldn't, or are having these two issues simultaneously, looked at by SCA and by whatever coalitions you do build? Are you trying to enforce the no establishment clause sort of from multiple angles, or if you accomplish one, does the other become moot?
Let me address the IRS issue first, and I'll come back to politicking from the pulpit later.
Thank you.
But for the IRS issue, it's really important to raise it. There are a lot of things that even secular people don't know about the specific loopholes written into the law for religious organizations that are really outrageous. I mean, you think of Joyce Meyer, who has a private jet that flies her around the country, and people like Joel Osteen, tremendous millions of dollars in that organization. And frankly, if you check out their homes, which you can check out on Google, actually, if you go to our webpage at secular.org, you can look at a video we did that shows some of the pictures of some of these homes. Those get to be tax deductible in a way that nobody else gets. And we're talking about people who live like kings. I mean, really live like kings, and it's on your dime, in a sense.
Not even GE has those kinds of tax deductions. These are
right. And
yeah.
Exactly. And on the other end of the spectrum, think about, let's say, probably many of your listeners or you folks as well might know someone who's the executive director of some struggling nonprofit, a 501c3, poor children with AIDS, all this sort of thing. Seriously, who are really working on the street to help the most vulnerable in our society, or helping poor kids in Uganda or some such. Those folks, zippo, as far as these kind of tax loopholes. So these are people who are really working hard to help the most vulnerable, nothing. But when you talk about a fancy schwanky house for some of the richest in the United States, because they happen to be mega ministers at a mega church, well, then they get special IRS treatment. Now, that is striking to me when they're out there saying, let's cut Medicare. We don't take a position on Medicare, but, I'm just saying, when those kind of things are on the table, why are these people getting these advantages? So
now, if they were to, if Sean, if they were to if the loopholes were to be closed, would it really matter then what their activities are in terms of politicking from the pulpit or traveling around like kings, as long as they didn't have special tax exemption?
Well, there's a whole lot of other things they do that have affected that. And then I want to tell you something just straight up, or realistically, and we've seen previous votes in Congress that unfortunately back up what I'm telling you, is that with this Congress at this time, the odds of our being successful are small in terms of changing the IRS code in a way you or I might think is obviously right. These things have built up over decades, and, you know, forget about the folks in the Republican Party. There's a lot of folks in the Democratic Party who would be hesitant to take this on. There was recently under Senator Grassley, senator from Iowa, there was some examination of this issue, but in the end they kicked the can down the road and they appointed, guess who, a bunch of fundamentalist ministers to review, let's think, whether fundamentalist ministers should get vast tax breaks. I'm not making this up. And so that's the kind of situation you face in Congress today. But bringing it up is really, really important because it kind of reminds me of if you analogize it to, say, gay people. When I was in the legislature, gay people over the decades, they would, you know, I wasn't around for all that, but back in the 70s or whatnot, they'd get like 2 votes or 3 votes out of the whole legislature. But each time they'd introduce the bill again, there'd be another education, and each time they'd go from 5 to 7 to 10, and it's going to take decades. But I saw by the time I was in elective office for 10 years where you saw that tipping point where, at least in my state, where gay people really made tremendous progress forward, but they'd done 2 decades of work before I showed up. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's what I think we need to do, is really buckle down and say we are where we are, and we're optimistic about making that change. So the other thing I want to do is on our website, we went from when I first got hired for this job, which isn't 2 years yet, we went from about 8 or 9 issues on our website. We're up to 14. We're going to have over 30 issues. And why is that important? Because 1 is the substance of the policy, but 2 is so that you and your listeners can say to your neighbors, your in-laws, whoever you're talking to, see, this is why this is important. So we're going to get out there and provide you reasons why this is important to make a difference.
So you'd said before, Sean, that like comparing this to the gay rights movement, and we're talking about decades of work to get to this point, we're clearly not there yet. What would you consider a metric of success? What would a measurement of success to understand that we're moving forward? Because it's going to be a long time before it's a really, really big one. Like, how would you measure success of the SCA?
There are several measures, actually, some of which you can see at our website at secular.org. We have a business plan, and that's something I really worked hard on. I worked closely with someone on our board, Todd Stiefel, where we decided we needed to be more strategic as a movement. And I put something together called Our Secular Decade. And in fact, we're holding a summit in May 19 through 21 in Washington, D.C., and it's not a conference. Our member organizations, we have 10 member organizations, they do great conferences. That's not what we're doing. This is a strategic planning meeting, and we're talking about measurable effects in terms of media hits we get, in terms of number of members of Congress who are out, and our goal is 2020, sort of a clear vision, if you will, by 2020, where we see more, we have 1, as you know, but more people who are openly non-theistic in Congress, more profound impact in the mainstream media, knowing of our policy stands and our positions. And then the key thing for me that will greatly increase our lobbying effectiveness is straight out secular coalitions in every single state. We're going to have 50. Every single state will have a secular coalition by 2020. And that's going to have a profound positive effect on this movement, because it means people can go to their federal officials in, say, Washington State or wherever, and then go also to their state capital, perhaps, and talk about issues there. And that gives us a voice. 10 years in politics, I was majority whip, I was on appropriations, I was in positions where I should be lobbied. Not once in 10 years did someone say, I'm a secular American, I'm with a secular organization, I hope you'll vote with me. But did I get lobbied by the fundamentalist folks? Absolutely, all the time.
Yeah, I was
but,
also.
So if you're a politician, you want to change that.
Yeah, I was curious, Sean. You had mentioned that representatives from the SCA had met with representatives of the White House just last year. I was kind of curious how that meeting went. I know that it's not an unheard thing for a politician to pay lip service to a group or to a constituency, or to meet with them with the idea of, okay, we'll talk to them, but then that'll shut them up. Did you get that impression, or did you get an impression like this is a meeting that will lead to more meetings and possibly a relationship?
Are you saying that politicians would say hypocritical things? I am outraged that you would make that allegation. No, here's what I would say about it, is it doesn't matter, in a sense. And actually, I'm writing something about this very point. I'm sorry about the airport here, but that there are politicians, more so I think than any time in American history, elected to high office. I'm talking about U.S. Congress, which by definition is a powerful office. There's only 535 members. So even to be a House member is a very powerful position. And I'd say that there are more believing theocrats in the U.S. Congress today than at any prior time in American history. So it's very serious. And then once you get that sort of critical core, then the other ones who maybe are, like you say, just mouthing the word, but it affects them so that in the end they vote the way the fundamentalists want and the extremists want. And so even if they're doing it hypocritically, it doesn't matter. They're still pressing the button. When it comes to politics, are you going to press green or red in the end? And unfortunately, there's a cultural zeitgeist, however you want to term it, where a lot of the ones who might be so-called hypocritical are going to press the way the extremists want, and we got to change that zeitgeist.
So if you could leave our atheist listeners with one way in which you'd like to see them involved, how should atheists be engaged politically?
Organize. It's really got to happen. You know, we can make, and we do, I think, make a very strong case on your behalf in Washington, D.C., to the executive branch, to the legislative branch. We're really working it on your behalf. However, as a politician, 10 years, I can tell you, what do politicians care about? They care about two kinds of numbers of people and numbers of dollars. And you know, to analogize to African Americans, when African Americans were silenced, you know, there could be a lot of them, as far as in the population, a lot of African Americans, but until they started organizing to where they were making of themselves, to their great credit, a voice for themselves, politicians are just going to ignore them. We have, like I say, a huge portion, I think underreported portion of the general U.S. population, but the percentage that is actually organized and saying, I'm going to participate, I'm going to join one of our member groups and become a dues-paying member, I'm going to spearhead a secular coalition for Washington State or a secular coalition for Vermont or wherever the case. That is what needs to happen, because that's when politicians start to go, oh, really? You can email a lot of people, not in America, a lot of people in my district? Oh, well, then I better start listening. That's what we got to start.
Over the time, in my recent vacation in Arizona, I actually was there when the Secular Coalition of Arizona branch their Secular Coalition of America branch opened up in Arizona. And yeah, they were very excited about it. If our listeners would like to interface with the Secular Coalition of America, what would you suggest they do?
Well, I'd suggest the first step is maybe talking with local groups. We have a template agreement for states to create a secular coalition for X state. But I'd say before you just whip it out and say, oh, let's sign this, that's not how it works. What we're looking for people who say, I'm really willing to spearhead. You mentioned Arizona. We had some great leaders there, people like Matt Shonley and Sir Rob Lane and many others in Arizona who said, we're gonna bite into this. We're going to not just expect Washington, D.C. Secular Coalition for America to do this for us. We're going to organize. We're going to call up people geographically diverse around the state. We're going to make sure all the different types of non-theist groups are invited and included. And we're going to make those kind of phone calls and do the emailing necessary to bring a group together, because we in D.C. aren't claiming that we can do that for states. We can't. It's up to the people on the ground in the different states to say, I care enough about this to start getting stuff going. And then you contact us and say, hey, you know, we've really done our homework, and by the way, we'd like to see a template agreement, and then it lays out some criteria. For example, we want a group that's website ready. That's something we want moving forward, is that groups are able to link to us and vice versa. We want them really done their due diligence in terms of connecting with all the groups geographically and with our 10-member organization chapters within various states. So that would be a huge positive thing. And a lot about this is on our website at secular.org.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you got a plane to catch there, Sean.
It does look like they're loading up the people here, so I guess so.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. Again, Sean Faircloth of the Secular Coalition of America, you have a good day.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.
Hey, thank you so much. And please, find the videos. There's videos about Secular Coalition and videos I've done that, you can put them on your Facebook page and kind of encourage your friends to get involved.
All right.
Thanks so much, Sean.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep.
This is Ask an Atheist, 253-584-1480. And we are meeting up at Dorky's today at 5 p.m. And that's at Pacific and 9th. Again, this is Ask an Atheist, 253-584-1480. See you in a minute.
You can advertise on Ask an Atheist on the radio, on our website, and in our podcast. People just like you who have the same interests are listening right now, just like you are, and thousands will download this podcast and listen to it later. If you have a product, service, or idea to sell, people here in the Pacific Northwest and people around the world, thousands will hear your message. Let us help you sell your product, service, or idea. Contact us at advertising@askanatheist.tv. That's advertising@askanatheist.tv.
Are you tired of religious dogma influencing government policy? Do you support the separation of church and state? Then the Secular Coalition for America is your voice in Washington, D.C. The Secular Coalition for America is the only national lobbying organization representing atheists, agnostics, humanists, and other secular Americans in our nation's capital. The Secular Coalition for America speaks out for millions of non-theistic and non-religious Americans who support public policies based on science and reason, not religious bias. Go to secular.org today to sign up for emails and get involved. That's secular.org.
Secular humanism is a non-theistic view of the universe built on a foundation of reason, science, and democracy. Humanists support intellectual freedom and critical thinking, and we hold that human beings are autonomous centers of moral development. The Humanists of Washington is the oldest humanist organization in the state and offers a community of free thinkers who educate the public and celebrate life. For information on how you can be a part of the humanist activities in the Puget Sound area, become a member of the Humanists of Washington today. Visit humanistofwashington.org.
This is Ask an Atheist, 253-584-1480.
So, yeah, we've talked a lot today about where atheists are in politics, where we're going in politics, but let's talk a little bit, let's close this out by talking, where do we want to be? Where do we want to end up? And I think if I want anything for non-believers in politics, I would love for it to be a non-issue. I would like to see something very much like what we have in the United Kingdom, where Nicholas Clegg, the head of the Liberal Democrats Party, an atheist, and now the Deputy Prime Minister, when he ran, no, it was not an issue. Nobody cared. Nobody cared that he didn't believe in God. I don't say we would necessarily want an atheist candidate or an atheist party. We want this to no longer be a barrier to running. We want to be a constituency. I would ideally love to see both major political parties and every other party in between putting out atheists for insert candidate buttons, bumper stickers. I would like to be someone, to be in a place where there's no longer no consequence for saying horrible things about non-believers, where it would have the same category as being black, being gay, being Jewish, being a woman, that if somebody says something bigoted, it won't just be atheists speaking out.
I think it will be a big deal when we finally have an atheist president. And notice I say when.
When. I do think it is only a matter of time, and I wouldn't be surprised if we've already had one. I just want to have one that isn't afraid to say so.
Yeah, that's true.
I like the same thing. Is like, yes, we have one open atheist in the House of Representatives, Pete Stark. He's not the only one. But we have a backdrop right now where it's very hard for someone to be an atheist, be open about it, and not completely harpoon their political career. That's what we want to change.
We know that Sean Faircloth, whom we just heard from, when he was in the Maine state legislature, gave an opening invocation that is usually reserved for clergy. And what did he do? He quoted Walt Whitman and Susan Jacoby from her novel or her volume Freethinkers. We would love to have opening invocations to legislative sessions be something completely secular.
Yeah.
Let's get Christopher Hitchens on that.
Yeah, well, much like most of the topics that we have to fit into an hour, there is so much that we can still talk about, and we will be talking about it. This is Ask an Atheist. It's a production of NEDM Media. My name is Sam Mulvey. My co-hosts today were Mike Gillis, hey, and Rebecca Friedman. Again, we're meeting at Dorky's. You can email us at www.askanatheist.tv, or you can give us a voicemail like the one you heard today at 206-420-0997. You guys?
Our call screener today was Rosalind Townsend.
Our call screener today was Rosalind Townsend. I knew I was skipping something. Sorry, Rosalind. We'll see you guys next week.